Pinocchio at the Puppet Theatre. Late one night, many years ago, Geppetto, the old woodcarver, was busily working in his toy shop, putting the finishing touches to a puppet he was making. At last it was ready, and Geppetto gazed lovingly at his work. There in front of him was the most lifelike boy puppet, with big eyes, a turned-up nose, and a very cheeky grin. "Well, do you like him?" the woodcarver asked his pets. Figaro the cat took one look and turned away disdainfully, while the goldfish Cleo made a face and splashed angrily about in her bowl. "Oh dear," laughed Geppetto, "I do believe you're jealous of my puppet. But I like him, and I shall keep him for myself and call him, Pinocchio." The old woodcarver held the puppet by its strings and played and danced with it until he was tired out. Laying down on his bed, he stared through the window at the starry sky. Suddenly he sat bolt upright, waking up a very sleepy Figaro who lay curled on the end of the bed. "Look, the wishing star!" he exclaimed. "See how it shines bigger and brighter than all the other stars." Geppetto gazed in wonder at the beautiful star, and then decided to make a wish. I wish that my little puppet Pinocchio could be a real boy. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful, Figaro? A real boy?" "Ha!" snorted Figaro in disgust, and he wasn't the only one who thought it was a silly idea. Jiminy Cricket was perched on the shelf above Geppetto's bed, and had overheard the woodcarver making his wish. "A real boy? Impossible," he said to himself. "How could a wooden puppet turn into a real boy?" But soon after Geppetto and the cat fell asleep, Jiminy was amazed to see the wishing star shooting through the skies towards the toy shop. Then a dazzling light seemed to fill the window, and there in the room stood a fairy with a magic wand and a dress of sparkling blue. "Good old Geppetto," she whispered to the sleeping woodcarver. "You've given so much happiness to others, you deserve to have your wish come true." She stepped over to the puppet which was lying where Geppetto had left him on the workbench. "Little puppet made of pine," she said in a silvery voice, "wake up, the gift of life is thine." At once the strings fell away from the puppet, and Pinocchio sat up and rubbed his eyes. Oh, I can move," he cried with delight, waving his wooden arms in the air, and I can talk as well." "Yes," said the blue fairy, "I've made Geppetto's wish come true." "Am I a real boy?" asked Pinocchio eagerly. "No, not yet," smiled the blue fairy. "You must prove yourself to be good and kind, truthful and brave, and then I shall make you a real boy. But first you must learn the difference between right and wrong." "Right and wrong?" said the bewildered puppet. "But how will I know what is right and what is wrong?" "Your conscience will tell you," said the blue fairy. But what's my conscience?" asked Pinocchio, even more puzzled. "Oh dear, it's hopeless," Jiminy Cricket said out loud. "The poor boy doesn't know anything. He hasn't even got a conscience." The blue fairy bent down to see where the voice came from, and spotted the tiny cricket perched on a matchbox. "Would you like to be Pinocchio's conscience?" "Me?" gasped the startled cricket. Well, why, yes." "Then from this day you are Pinocchio's conscience," said the fairy, waving her magic wand. "Oh, thank you. Thank you, blue fairy," said Jiminy, who was quite taken aback by the honour of speaking to a real live fairy. "I shall make sure he's a good boy." But after he and Pinocchio had waved goodbye to her, Jiminy began to worry about whether he'd be able to keep his word. "Now listen, Pinocchio," he said sternly. "Whenever you're tempted to do anything wrong, you must call me so I can stop you. I want you to promise." "All right, Jiminy," said Pinocchio. When Geppetto woke up and saw his puppet moving, he thought he was dreaming. "Father! Father!" Pinocchio yelled excitedly. "I've come alive, and one day I'm going to be a real boy." "But, oh, it's only a dream," said the woodcarver sadly. "No, it's not. It's real. I'm alive." Geppetto blinked in astonishment, and then laughed for joy and hugged his puppet. "My wish! Oh, my wish has come true!" he cried. "Oh, Pinocchio, my boy!" Geppetto was beside himself with happiness, and seeing the old man's joy, even Figaro and Cleo were no longer jealous and welcomed Pinocchio into the family. One day, Geppetto bought Pinocchio a cap and blazer and told him he was going to school like any other boy. On the first morning, Geppetto proudly waved goodbye on the doorstep, and Jiminy Cricket followed behind to keep an eye on him. But unfortunately, Pinocchio never did get to school. Halfway there, he was waylaid by a fox and a shaggy black cat. They were two of the worst crooks in the land, and when they saw Pinocchio, they also saw their chance to make some money. "Look, Gideon, a little wooden boy. What a stroke of luck," sniggered the fox, Honest John. He called himself Honest John to trick people into thinking he was a good person. "Well, I never," hissed Gideon the cat. "Did you know that Stromboli's famous puppet theatre's in town?" said Honest John. "A puppet without any strings must be worth a fortune." So the two crooks approached Pinocchio as he skipped along the road with his satchel and an apple for his teacher. "Hello, where are you going, little boy?" asked Honest John. I'm going to school," said Pinocchio proudly. "School? What do you want to go to school for, when you could be a great star in the theatre? If you come with us, we can make you famous." "Really?" said Pinocchio innocently. "Oh, I'd love to be famous." Immediately he forgot all about school and walked off happily with the crooks. "Hey, Pinocchio, wait!" cried Jiminy, racing to catch up with him. "Pinocchio, you've got to go to school. You've got to be a good boy, remember?" But Pinocchio didn't even seem to hear him. That evening, Stromboli, the big fat puppet master, announced his new act to the theatre audience.
"I bring you the only puppet in the world with no strings at all."
Pinocchio came onto the stage and sang and danced while the crowd clapped and roared with delight. He was a great success. "Oh, dear," sighed Jiminy sadly. "Pinocchio won't want to know me any more now that he's famous." And he walked out of the theatre with his head hanging low. Later that evening, Pinocchio was sitting in the theatre wagon watching Stromboli counting his piles of money.
"Oh, what a success! Brilliant! You're a sensation, Pinocchio."
"Thank you, Mr. Stromboli," Pinocchio said politely. "But, goodbye. I think I'll go home now."
"Go home?"
roared Stromboli. "Yes, sir," said Pinocchio. I want to go home and see Geppetto and my father." Stromboli gave a cruel laugh as he grabbed Pinocchio and threw him into a cage, locking the door firmly.
"This is your home now," he shouted. "You'll stay here forever and make lots of money for me."
"Oh, no," cried Pinocchio. "Let me go."
"We'll tour the world together," said Stromboli, "and when you're too old to sing and dance, I'll chop you up for firewood."
"Oh, no," pleaded Pinocchio. "Please let me go." But Stromboli only walked away, chuckling gleefully to himself. Pinocchio sat down sadly in the cage. "Oh, if only I'd listened to Jiminy Cricket," he sobbed. "If only I could be at home with my dear father." And meanwhile, back at the toy shop, Geppetto was becoming extremely worried. "He should have been back from school hours ago," he said anxiously. "What could have happened to him?" Figaro and Cleo shook their heads miserably and didn't know what to say. "Well," said Geppetto sadly, "I can't eat or rest until I find him." And he put on his coat and went out into the dark and stormy night to search for his beloved son. Jiminy Cricket was also wandering the streets, feeling wretched and wondering what to do. "Pinocchio's gone away to be a star, and I didn't even wish him luck. Maybe I could go and visit him. Yeah,
Surely he's not too famous to speak to an old friend?
Jiminy suddenly cheered up at the thought of seeing his little wooden friend again. As he hurried to catch up with Stromboli's travelling wagon, he had no idea that at that very moment Pinocchio was desperately hoping that the little cricket would come and help him escape.
Mickey and Donald go to a wedding. It had been a tiring day for Mickey and Donald. They had travelled a long way to see one of Mickey's relations getting married. But now the wedding was over, they were both rather glad to get to bed. Donald was soon fast asleep, but with weddings on his mind, it wasn't long before he was dreaming that Mickey and Minnie were getting married, and he was a guest at their wedding. As Donald dreamed on, he saw that married life wasn't living up to Mickey's expectations. "Do hurry," ordered Minnie. "Anyone would think that 10 bags of shopping were heavy." And then, "Don't forget to put the dishes away when you've finished," said Minnie. "Oh, and please don't splash water on the floor. It's just been polished, and it'll lose its shine." Mickey groaned. When wash day came, it was just as bad. "Take care with my white dress," called Minnie as Mickey hung out the washing. But the wind whipped it out of his hands and dropped it in the mud. No matter how hard Mickey tried, he seemed to make mistakes. He was sure Minnie said, "Take the cakes out of the oven at 5:30. Well, it was only 6 o'clock when he remembered. Not that late, really. At exactly the same time as Donald was dreaming about Mickey being married, Mickey was dreaming that he was at the wedding of Donald and Daisy. What a handsome couple they made. But Donald seemed to keep getting into trouble as well, especially as the nephews were always around. "Oh, look," they cried. "Uncle Donald's broken another vase. Let's go and tell Daisy." Sweeping the chimney wasn't a success either. "What a mess!" cried Hughie. "Shouldn't you have covered the carpet first?" asked Louie. "I think soot is lovely," said Dewey, making footprints everywhere. Donald's next job was to change a light bulb. "Boo!" said the triplets in unison as they crept up behind him. Donald was so startled that the chair he was standing on toppled over and he was left dangling. "Dinner's ready," he heard Daisy call. "Hurry up, Uncle Donald," the triplet said. "You can't hang around there all day." Donald fell to the floor with a loud crash. One day, Daisy left him to do all the washing. "We'll put in the soap powder, Uncle Donald," chorused the triplets. Then they tipped in half the packet when he wasn't looking. Donald had never seen so much foam. But luckily for Mickey and Donald, the dreaming ended then. They both sat bolt upright in bed, sweat standing out on their brows. "Oh, Donald," said Mickey, "I had such an awful dream about you." "I had an awful dream about you too," said Donald. "You weren't thinking about getting married, were you?" asked Mickey. "Oh, no," said Donald hurriedly. How about you, Mickey?" "Oh, no, no," exclaimed Mickey hastily. "Well, that's all right then," said Donald, greatly relieved. "It's a deal." And the two friends leaned out of bed and shook hands on it. Then, chuckling, they snuggled down again, and before long they were both in a deep and dreamless sleep.
Dopey's Heavy Boots. Dopey smiled Snow White. "Those boots are quite worn out. We'd better go straight off to buy you some new ones."
"Well," began Dopey, looking worried, "I'm helping to lay the garden path right now, but I do need new boots."
"Then we'll go tomorrow," said Snow White. The others were already busy mixing cement. They had big bags of cement powder and sand and buckets of water, and Happy was stirring a huge heap of the wet, sloppy mixture. Doc was putting down bits of wood to mark the edges of the new path, and the others were carrying buckets full of wet cement to pour in.
"Come on, Dopey," grumbled Grumpy. "There's no time to gossip with Snow White. Go and get a bucket."
"Where will I find one?" asked Dopey, but Grumpy had walked off and didn't hear him. Dopey stood and waited for one of the dwarfs to come back with an empty bucket, but they were all busy smoothing down the path and nobody came. After a while, Dopey thought he would look for a bucket in the potting shed, but a funny thing happened on the way. His old boots were getting heavier and heavier until he could hardly put one foot in front of the other. Just then, Snow White came out to see how the path was getting on. "It's lovely," she said. "And isn't it setting quickly? Look, it's gone quite hard at this end."
"My boots are quite hard too," said poor Dopey, "and heavy."
Snow White looked at his boots and laughed. "Oh, Dopey," she said, "you've been walking in the cement. No wonder your boots are heavy. You'd better take them off." Dopey took off his boots, thump, thump, like two great rocks. "Never mind," said Snow White cheerfully. "I'll put them in the rockery. They'll look lovely with flowers growing in them. And now I think we'd better buy you some new boots after all, don't you?"
"Yeah,"
said Dopey, staring at his bare toes.
"I do."
Pooh's Busy Day. "It's one of those mornings," said Pooh to himself, "one of those mornings when there's nothing to do." Piglet had invited him to tea in the afternoon, but that was hours away. Pooh said, and then he said, again. He looked out of the window. Even after his third helping of breakfast, he still felt restless. There wasn't anything he particularly wanted to do. He just wanted to do something. So that when Piglet asked, as he was bound to, "What have you done today?" Pooh could tell him. "Perhaps," said Pooh, "a little stroll will inspire me." So off he went. Pooh hadn't gone very far when Rabbit flashed past. "Moving, Pooh. Sorry, busy. Can't stop now. Have to run." And with that he was gone. "Well," said Pooh, uncertain whether he had actually seen Rabbit or whether he had imagined the whole thing. "Isn't it strange how Rabbit always has something to do?" In a short while, Pooh came to Kanga's house. All the windows were thrown open, and furniture, pots and pans and crockery were laid out neatly on the grass. There was a smell of wax polish in the air. Pooh was just wondering whether his friends were moving when Kanga came out of the house carrying a rolled-up rug. Tigger followed close behind with a lampshade on his head, and Baby Roo came last, waving a feather duster. "Hello," said Kanga briskly. "We're spring-cleaning the house from top to bottom. Roo, Roo, will you stop that?" Roo, imitating Tigger, was at that precise moment balancing a teacup on his head. Look at me, Pooh," he shouted, just before he fell over and broke the cup. "Roo, I warned you," said Kanga, picking him up and dusting him down. Pooh could see that this was a very busy day, so he said his goodbyes and then hurried home. But he knew now exactly what he could do. The spring cleaning. The question was, where should he begin? Pooh pondered for a while, then decided. The honey cupboard. In no time at all he had spring-cleaned all the half-empty and quarter-empty jars, scraping out what was left in the bottoms and licking clean the lids. Pooh counted the empty jars, there were 5 in all, and wondered what to do with them. "I could arrange them on a shelf, except I haven't got a shelf," he thought. "I suppose," he continued after some consideration, "I could always make one." Without more ado, Pooh fetched a hammer, nails, wood, and a chair to stand on. While he hammered, he made up a little poem. When a Pooh decides to do, he doesn't mess about. He gets right on and does, of this there is no doubt. He doesn't stand around chatting, he doesn't lie in the sun. When someone stops him for a word, he says, I have to run. When the shelf was finished, Pooh stood back to admire his handiwork. He squinted at it with one eye shut for some time, then tried looking with his head tilted, first this way and then that. Perhaps, he said to himself, it will look better, more like a shelf, from further away. But even from the other side of the room, and even with the curtains drawn, the shelf still didn't look quite right. Suddenly Pooh had an idea. It needs a lick of paint, that's all, he said, fetching his brushes and paint pot. Soon he was humming again and thinking that he really should offer to make Piglet a shelf. Just then there was a knock on the door.
It's me,
squeaked Piglet.
Can I come in?
Hold on a moment, please, said Pooh importantly. I'm a little busy. He was about to add, but I'll stop for tea, when the chair he was standing on began to topple over. To steady himself, he dropped the paint pot and grabbed hold of the shelf. But the shelf had not been built to take the weight of a rather stout bear, and after a few moments, which seemed to Pooh to be very long moments, there was a sound of splintering wood, and the shelf and Pooh crashed to the ground. Once the crash and clatter had died away, there was complete and utter silence. Then Piglet's voice piped up. Pooh? Yes, said Pooh weakly. If you're very busy just now, I can go away and come back later. Piglet was rather anxious in case all that noise meant that Pooh was fighting heffalumps, and if this was so, then the last thing Piglet wanted to do was interfere. Pooh, sitting amongst the ruins of his shelf, had a vision of Piglet's table laid out for tea. Hastily he said, Actually, you might be able to give me a hand. Ah! Piglet pushed open the door slowly. Then he peered in nervously, checking all the time that there was nothing unpleasant lurking. Once he was certain that there was only Pooh, a collapsed shelf, and a large puddle of spilt paint, he stepped boldly into the room. I know how busy you are, said Piglet, so I dropped by because I thought you might have forgotten about tea. It's getting rather late. Tea? Tea? Said Pooh airily. Oh, dear, and I'm so busy right now doing a spot of shelf building and spring cleaning. Piglet was very puzzled. He had never seen Pooh's house in such a state, and he had never known Pooh to forget an invitation to tea. But he thought it might be rude to ask questions, so he said, Well, never mind. I'll see if Owl will come to tea instead. No, no, said Pooh, rather too quickly. Then, in the calmest voice he could manage, under very trying circumstances, he said, No need to do that, Piglet. I think I've had enough of being busy for one day. Piglet smiled as Pooh stepped carefully over the remains of his shelf and shut his door firmly behind him. And Pooh decided that, on reflection, it might be best to offer to build Piglet a shelf some other day.
The Rescuers. Down on the waterfront in New York's Dockland, there lived two very special mice, Bernard and Bianca. This daring couple were the top agents of the Mouse Rescue Aid Society, who were dedicated to helping people in distress. One day, from the murky waters of the docks, they fished out a bottle with a message inside, a real SOS from a young orphan girl called Penny. It seemed she was being held prisoner on an abandoned riverboat by the evil Madame Medusa and her partner Snoops. Why on earth should they want this poor girl? Asked Bianca. Oh, gasped Bernard, his whiskers twitching in distress as he read on. Medusa is after the famous Devil's Eye diamond. It's hidden in a cave on the edge of a swamp, and there's a very narrow tunnel. Penny is small enough to crawl through and look for the jewel. Come on, said Bianca grimly. There's no time to lose. And the two brave little mice set off at once on their dangerous rescue mission. Their method of transport was rather unusual. They used Albatross Airlines, courtesy of Orville the Albatross. The seating accommodation was of the simplest kind, an old sardine can, and the weather was none too good on their journey. What with rainstorms and snowstorms, the two cold and miserable mice had no idea where they were. Then suddenly, "Bail out now!" shouted Orville, and before they knew what had happened, the two mice found themselves afloat in the swamp, as Orville flew off into the night. "Look!" exclaimed Bernard, and there in front of them was the rotting hulk of the riverboat where Penny was imprisoned. Paddling furiously, the two mice soon arrived at the boat. Then, stealthily, they crept up the anchor rope onto the deck. "Shh! Listen!" whispered Bianca. "Voices!"
"Why hasn't she found my diamond yet? My precious Devil's Eye! You didn't leave her down there long enough."
"Don't blame me. You were the one who wanted to use her."
"We have to use her. She's the only one small enough to squeeze down into the cave. Well, tomorrow she'll go down that hole again and stay until she's got that diamond."
It was Medusa and her greedy accomplice Snoops talking. If the mice were to save Penny, it was obvious they would have to act quickly. But it was not going to be easy to reach Penny. Medusa's two pet crocodiles guarded the boat, and they soon smelt out the mice as they crouched in hiding. Just in time, Bernard and Bianca leapt down and ran for their lives as the crocodiles came snapping after them. Many a time the terrified mice thought their end had come as the great jaws snapped shut within a whisker of their tails. "It's no use," puffed Bernard, when at last they reached a safe hiding place. "What can two little mice like us do against them?" "But we can't give up now. The society is counting on us," said Bianca reproachfully. "Besides, who else will rescue that poor little girl?" So, plucking up all their courage, the mice set off once more to seek out Penny. They could hear her sobbing quietly as she got ready for bed. "Don't cry, Penny dear," whispered Bianca. "We got your message in a bottle and we've come to rescue you." At the sound of her voice, Penny looked up, then stared in disbelief at the two tiny creatures before her. "But didn't you bring someone big with you, like a policeman?" she asked. "Well, no," stuttered Bernard. "But if the three of us stick together, I'm sure we'll be all right." Penny allowed herself to be cheered up a bit. Then they all sat down together, and Penny told them all she knew, so they could work out a rescue plan. But early the next morning, they were woken by a loud roaring noise outside the window. Medusa was there in her swamp-mobile, and she had come to fetch Penny. Penny just had time to push Bianca and Bernard into her pocket before she was whisked off across the swamp to the eerie cave, with the shifty Snoops following close behind. "Please, don't put me in that horrible cave again," Penny begged. "Teddy gets scared down there."
"Oh, poor Teddy," crooned Medusa as she grabbed the little bear. "Well, he can stay here with nice Aunt Medusa until you find that diamond, or you'll never set eyes on him again."
Penny was powerless. Her beloved Teddy was her only friend in the world, and if she wanted him back, she would have to do what Medusa wanted. She allowed herself to be lowered down the tunnel into the cave in a bucket, the two mice still hiding in her pocket. The cave was a damp and creepy place, filled with the skeletons of pirates who had gone down there to hide their treasure and never returned. In one wall, close to the floor, there was a deep hole. "That's where the water comes in," said Penny, pointing. It was low tide now, but when the tide rose, Bernard shuddered at the thought. They had better get to work fast. On a narrow ledge close to the hole, Bianca noticed a round object which had a dull, whitish gleam in the dim light. "Look, Bernard!" she exclaimed and grabbed his arm. Nervously, the two mice edged their way over to take a closer look. It was a skull. As Penny held up a lantern so the mice could examine it, a blinding flash of light shot from within. "Penny, we've found the devil's eye!" shouted Bianca excitedly, and the two mice crept inside the skull for a better view. As they struggled to pull out the diamond, a wave splashed up through the hole and washed over them, and then another and another. The tide was coming in. "Let's forget the diamond and get out of here before we all drown," spluttered Bernard with the water almost over his head. Fighting against the rising tide, Penny grabbed a rusty old pirate's sword and made a desperate attempt to prise the diamond out of the skull. At last, the skull gave way and the diamond floated out. Quick as a flash, Penny grabbed hold of the mice and the diamond just as the water swirled up again. All three were caught up in a terrible whirlpool that threatened to suck them down the hole. Penny gathered all her strength and leapt into the bucket just as another huge wave crashed into the cave. Looking up, she saw Snoops and Madame Medusa gazing greedily down. "Pull me up! I've got the devil's eye!" she called. The instant Penny stepped from the bucket at the top of the tunnel, Medusa snatched the diamond from her hands.
"It's mine! All mine!" she gloated.
Then, before Snoops could interfere, she quickly stuffed it inside the teddy bear and, of course, refused to give the teddy bear back. Penny was dreadfully upset. The mice had hoped they would be able to make a quick getaway, but they couldn't let Medusa get away with that. Medusa had more plans of her own. As soon as they arrived back on the riverboat, she turned to Snoops.
"You've done your job. You can go now," she said, stroking her crocodiles and looking at him threateningly.
"But what about my share in the diamond?" he protested. "You said—"
"Never mind what I said. Go!"
screamed Medusa, and the crocodile snapped threateningly. A furious argument broke out between Medusa and Snoops, and under cover of this, the two mice signalled to Penny to make a run for it. The precious teddy lay unnoticed on the deck. Penny snatched it up and hurried to the swampmobile. "Do you know how to start it?" Bernard asked Penny. "No, but I've watched Medusa do it." "I'll try," she said. But when she turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Bernard glanced back anxiously. They were still fighting, but their departure must be noticed soon. Bernard fiddled with all the switches he could see, and suddenly the motor roared into life. But as the engine revved up, a great jet of flame spurted from the exhaust, and in an instant the rotting timbers of the riverboat caught fire. As Penny, Bernard, Bianca and Teddy raced across the swamp to safety, they looked back and saw Medusa clinging to the great funnel of the riverboat, the only bit not engulfed in flames.
"Come back!" she screamed. "You can have the diamond! Come back and save me!"
"Don't worry," said Bernard grimly. "We've got the diamond, and we're not coming back." Safely home in New York, Penny became rather a celebrity, and in no time at all she had found a family to adopt her. Wherever she went, people told her how clever she was to have outwitted the evil Medusa.
"Oh, I didn't do it by myself," said Penny. "Two little mice helped me."
Of course, everyone smiled kindly, but no one believed her, except for the little mice who scurry about the houses in New York, for they know better. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?
with silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row, and pretty maids all in a row.